Welcome to the Future Media Podcast. I'm Ricky Sutton.
And I'm Alan Chappell. And this podcast goes deep into the collision of big tech
and the future of the world.
We explore how companies like Google, Meta, and Apple are impacting each of our lives.
I'm an investigative journalist.
I'm a privacy lawyer.
And every week we speak with experts to bring the unreported details into the light.
Denmark is officially the second happiest country on earth. It leads the world in design. I mean, it gave us Lego. It runs on some of the highest taxes on the planet, but it's also home to the obesity wonder drug Ozempic. So it's the perfect test lab, isn't it, to take on big tech's fat cats, with clever laws elegantly designed to put people's happiness and sustainability ahead of profit. There's an idea. Now, at the centre of it all is Karen Rond. She's a lawyer, a judge in Denmark's Court of Impeachment, and a former Member of Parliament. But she's also been a journalist. She's been a TV anchor and a reporter on the country's flagship leading current affairs show, Deadline. She's also worked, interestingly, in big tech as Netflix's head of policy in the Nordics. But today, she runs the DPCMO, which is the collective licensing body that's leading Denmark's drive to drag copyright into the AI era and make big tech pay for the content it uses. And it's a bloodbath. Google has cut a deal for search, and so has Microsoft's Bing, Yahoo, and DuckDuckGo, but Apple hasn't. It pulled Apple News, and now it's facing police action. Things are very different in Denmark. We're going to learn about that today. TikTok and Meta are both refusing to pay, and as a result are walking a tightrope, which means that if they lose, they'll face fines the size of the GDP of Bahrain. And Microsoft's LinkedIn, well, that's being dragged in front of arbitrators to answer for its actions. Now, I've been following this case and Denmark's work from afar for ages, but finally, after nearly 6 months, I'm finally getting the chance to ask Karen about how a small, happy country is rewriting the rules for big tech, AI and creativity, and how it may be the canary in the coal mine for the rest of Europe. So with the world looking on, welcome Karen Rond to the Future Media Podcast. We're delighted to have you. We have been trying to get this in the calendar for a couple of months, but I think that you've been a little busy. Is that a right read?
Yeah, that's true. But it's a great pleasure to be here with you today.
Oh, look, we're thrilled. So, as I said, I have been following, and Chris has too, we've been following what you've been up to from afar with fascination, frankly. Can you tell us where you're up to and you know, kind of where's the end game? Where are you trying to get to?
Oh, that's a very broad and huge question. But what we're trying to achieve is, of course, you know, a fair exchange of value with all big tech companies and AI companies using our content.
Right. But, and I've got to get to a question just before you carry on that, that requires all of the publishers to collaborate. And that's like herding cats, and everyone in the world immediately says, that's never going to happen. It sounds a bit like you might have pulled it off. Is that right?
Well, yes. You can say today we represent 99% of the entire Danish media industry. We span from digital startups to, you know, legacy media and also the state-owned public service broadcasters. You can say our BBCs. And that was not easy. I know many will say, you know, Denmark is a small country, so that should be easy. But it wasn't easy because we also have all, you can say, the historical disputes between public-owned and private-owned. We also have the traditional discussions among the digital startups, which have had very great cooperation in place with some of the big tech companies, and they were actually afraid that, you know, a collecting approach would jeopardize their great partnerships. So it was not easy, but we managed at the end of the day because, you know, for us it's more important. This is not just about fair remuneration or financial survival in a tech and AI age. At the end of the day, it's about democracy. It's about reliable information. It's about engaged, informed, empowered citizens. You know, that is our North Star. And that is why we have this collective approach, because this goes beyond each individual media outlet.
Karen, that's amazing. I've noticed something recently, and this might be a theme. The countries that have been most aggressive and most successful in passing the toughest rules have generally been countries with a culture they're trying to protect. So Korea has been incredibly strong against big tech because Korean is only spoken in Korea, and it doesn't want to have its culture homogenized by large American companies. South Africa's just passed very tough laws because it wants to protect 21 different native languages from being silenced by American or English language, okay? Is that also, do you think that's played a part in the Danish thing, or is that just a coincidence?
No, I think you're totally right. You know, in the Nordics, we have a very strong tradition for collective management, exactly because we know we are small nations with small languages. So this is about, you know, cultural diversity. It's also about linguistic diversity.
But you're also currently chairing the EU, right? You're currently you have the right. So the decisions that you're making.
Not you personally, Karen.
Oh
no, unfortunately not.
Right. But you have passed these laws in your country, and now you are sitting in the big chair in Europe. That has to be an opportunity to try and expand or stretch these changes. Is that on the agenda?
Yes, it definitely is. And you can say our organization is based on an EU directive, which has been transposed in all EU countries. And of course, you know, the EU presidency has been a huge opportunity for us. And you can also see it reflected in the EU program, the Danish work program, where the free press, the importance of a free press and a diverse press in this AI and tech era is highlighted under security. It's an issue under security, a security agenda. It's a new issue under the competitive agenda and innovation agenda. And of course, also it's stressed under the culture agenda.
Amazing. So I interrupted you at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your law, what it is you've done. And I'm really interested in how the various tech companies have reacted to the fact that you've put such an exacting responsibility on them.
Well, the EU directive was transposed into national legislation in the summer 21, in June 21, and we were established in July 21. And that was because, of course, we feared that Google especially would conquer and divide, as we have seen they have done on a global level. So it was extremely important to stay united and establish the CMO as soon as possible after the transposition. After the transposition, we reached out. You can say in the Danish transposition, we have a specific clause that allows the press publishers to organize a collective management organization. And that was on top of the directive. So that was, of course, key for us that we achieved this. And it's also very important to stress that we work very close together with the journalists and the authors, because we're in the same boat here. After we were established in the summer, we reached out to search engines, to social media, and to the news apps present on the Danish market. And later we reached out to the AI companies when our mandate was expanded in May 24, but I think we'll come back to that. And when it comes to search, you know, we had I have a commercial background, so we have a very commercial, solution-orientated partnerships mindset. We wanted to implement the new press publishers' rights in practice. So we wanted licensing agreement in place. So actually, you know, we would get revenue that could be reinvested in reliable content. But it was super, super difficult. It was a new European legal framework. When we reached out to some of the search engine, it was the first time they've ever heard about. Of course, they have been lobbying Brussels, but now we were talking to the partnerships, the commercial teams, not the policy teams. So we needed to explain, actually, the new legal framework. And it took time. And we had to do it, you can say our approach was a step-by-step approach. For example, with Microsoft, we had to enter into a memo of understanding where we stressed, you know, now we have a new legal framework in Europe. They acknowledged that, and they also acknowledged that we need to find, you know, a kind of fair exchange of value. But there was no, you know, amount in the memo of understanding. And then the next step was interim license agreement. And today we have managed to enter into interim license agreement with all search engines on the Danish market. So Google Search, Bing, Yahoo, DuckDuckGo, Ecosia, and the French one Quant. And of course, it's interim license agreements because we can't agree on the valuation with Google. When it comes to social media, it was and has been a struggle because actually, Meta, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, X, they do not acknowledge that they are in scope. So we have been testing all the legal tools we have in place when it comes to social media. And that has been our approach. When in general, when the tech companies will not enter into agreements with us, and we are very patient, and we really try for years to find common ground. But if we can't succeed in that, then we enforce our rights, and we mean it. Then when it comes away, we have a lot of pending cases against the social media. When it comes to news app, we managed to enter into an interim license agreement with the Axel Springer-owned news app called Upday. And after that, of course, I reached out to Apple, and because they had their news widget also in Denmark, and they refused to enter into an agreement. They refused to acknowledge the new legal framework. So we joined forces with the journalists and with the visual right holders and with the media industry organization, and we reported Apple to the police. So we have a pending case at the police against Apple. And then they shut down the service. Mm-hmm. But we still have a pending case because we're not giving up. They had it for 3 years. So we will continue to follow this case.
Karen, I've got to ask you, the police? Why the police? I mean, normally this goes to politicians, it goes to policy, it goes to competition law. Doesn't go to the police very often. So tell us about that.
It was because, we have, as I mentioned before, a lot of pending cases where we are testing all the other tools we have in the toolbox, and I can come back to that. But here we strongly believe this is a crystal clear violation of our Copyright Act. So we were trying to test, the police, whether they could handle this case, because we know since it's a new legal framework, it can be difficult with police cases, because here we need crystal clear legislation. And here we believe we have crystal clear legislation.
So, Chris,
I have a lovely image. A lovely image, Ricky, of just you walking into the police station saying, "I'd like to report a theft."
Yeah, exactly.
Is that actually...
And we believe it is, right?
Is that actually why it's a police matter? Because this is considered to be theft rather than just a copyright infringement? Because one's civil and one's criminal, I assume. The police don't investigate civil matters.
But they do. We have clauses in the Danish Copyright Acts where actually, if it's crystal clear violation of copyright, it is the police that will handle. And in Denmark, we are so lucky that we have a separate unit within the police handling IP violations.
Wow. Well,
yeah.
That I've never heard of anything like that. That sounds terrific.
Yeah.
And so
it is.
And how bad is it if you're found to be to have breached that? The police are going to turn up. That's going to rattle you a little bit. I'm not sure the tech guys are used to that. What happens if they're found to be liable? What are the kind of penalties that exist if the police are investigating?
Of course, it's often a fine penalty.
A fine?
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. All right. So if I shorthand what we've just talked about, and I am so enjoying this chat. Thank you. So it starts here. The search engines say we need content to remain relevant in search. So we're going to do a deal with you, and that's fine. But we are going to niggle about the commercials of that deal until the year 2078. And then we might decide we're not bothered anymore, right? So they're kind of pulling a chain. So I'm interested to know, first of all, with the search engines, what have they agreed to pay for, and where is the commercial piece stuck?
When we entered into the interim license agreements, Google presented their, you can say, European methodology and a number. And we had, and we still have, a lot of questions because we don't understand it. For us, it's still a black box. So what we suggested to Google is that we appointed a kind of independent third party to do the valuation, because we don't trust their numbers. We don't understand the figures or the methodology. And I could, of course, on my own do a Danish valuation, but of course they would say, we don't trust your numbers. We do not agree, whatever. So I suggested we used, for example, Charles River Associates in London, or we could ask the Commission, because this is a European legal framework, and it's a European issue. And so far, Google has rejected. So now we're considering, what is the right next step? Should it be a competition matter? As you mentioned also, that competition law is super, super important. Here I would say copyright and competition law goes hand in hand, and you have great experience from that in Australia. So we are analyzing, what is a wise next step. And in parallel, of course, we had the discussion around, they launched AI Overview, they launched AI Modes, and we actually, prior to the launch, we had reserved our rights. They decided to launch anyway. So now we have a lot of policy discussions and competition law discussions in Denmark and in the EU around this.
Chris, I'm going to shut up because I've got 500 things to talk about, but I should really let you have a word.
I just think, to go back to that point about the numbers, that what I hear from that is this, it ends up naturally in a stalemate, because Google say we'll use our numbers to get to our valuation, and they'll say there's no real benefit to us of having anything on the platform. We've heard that kind of, in fact, you interviewed Richard Gingratz the other day, who sort of spent years calculating the complete lack of value that Google got for publishers. Naturally, when we value it, we would probably, we would value that from our own perspective. It is interesting that in that negotiation, let's say Google could just say, we don't agree. And therefore, as you say, the stalemate is in their favor. And this is why, you always need the regulator, and the competition law kind of people in your corner. Because if a stalemate helps the big guys, you get stuck.
I fully agree. And it's very interesting, their approach, Google's approach, because now it's crystal clear, of course, also to policymakers, but also to the competition authorities in Denmark and the EU, that they're not transparent, because they reject, to do this joint analysis. So it's crystal clear they're dictating the amount. It's take it or leave it. And we would argue that is abuse of dominance, right?
Yeah. The good thing, though, is it reminds me that what's the old Winston Churchill thing about, would you sleep with me for £100? And the punch, I can't remember the actual joke, but the punchline is, we've established the principle, now we're just arguing about the money. So the fact that you are having a conversation about who does the valuation, it is a bigger step forward than people might think. Because if we go back a few years, we wouldn't have had the conversation. It would have been a flat out, like, we don't even entertain the conversation. If we're moving to a point where the conversation is about how we actually calculate value, that is a step forward that we should sort of recognize.
Definitely. And now it's a political issue, actually. It's on the table, in Denmark and in the EU. So I fully agree. And that is positive.
Yep.
15 months ago, I was asked to address the UN on this, and it's one of my proudest moments. And they asked for three things, but the thing that only the first one really mattered. And my response was, you need to prosecute these companies under your laws. Okay, so we allow them to operate on the basis of opaque American laws. And then when we try to argue that they're not even keeping to the American laws, they hide the data so we can't prove it. And then we just go, this is too hard, and walk away. We have laws explicitly for that not to happen. If somebody commits a criminal offense, we don't say, well, he said he was at his nan's house on Thursday, so we're just going to accept that because it's a bit hard. Yeah. But we don't do that with tech companies. They seem to have a power that means that even governments stop and say, this is actually just too hard, let's just let it go. Where have you guys found your courage?
I think, our approach has been manifolded, you can say. We decided to test all the legal tools we had at that time we started. We mentioned, the Apple, that we reported Apple to the police, but we have tested mediation against Meta, TikTok, OpenAI, and Gemini. We have tested arbitration against Meta and TikTok. We have started cases under the Digital Markets Acts against Meta and TikTok filed complaints to the EU Commission because they will not share data. And of course, data is key, not just only in relation to the valuation, but also how can we continue to create relevant content that are relevant for our users, our audience, when we don't know when people share, especially young people share on Instagram and TikTok. We have activated the Digital Services Act and filed a complaint against Facebook to the Irish authority because they don't have a contact person. So every time Facebook is violating, for example, or removing editorial content or our legal ad campaigns, we don't know who to contact. They do not respond when we write an email, but they are also at the same time censoring our content. And of course, the entire censorship discussions is super important for us as editorial media. We have filed a complaint to the Danish Radio and TV Board under the and another directive, the Audiovisual Directive, and we have filed a complaint against Facebook because of their scam ads, and we have filed a complaint against Instagram and TikTok because they have, they are not removing harmful and illegal content, and we're doing this complaints together with the children organizations in Denmark and another lawyer. Because, the agenda around securing young children and young people a safe environment, online environment, is not just about they should avoid meeting harmful and illegal content, but they should also have easy access to reliable, trustworthy news. We have cases against LinkedIn. We tried the Copyright License Tribunal. They came up with a very strange decision in June. So now we are taking them to court. We are preparing the court case. So we have, you can say, a legal track. And at the same time, the Danish Minister for Culture is saying he will take the lead in the EU when the Copyright Directive will be reviewed next year. We have tried, as I mentioned, mediation with the OpenAI. They didn't want to participate. So now we're going to sue them in the beginning of the new year. And again, we have parallel discussions with the competition authorities. We have parallel discussions actually also with the consumer authorities. So we have a lot of parallel discussions. And I think the learning from this is that we have tested all the tools we have available. And they doesn't work when it comes to global big tech because some of them have become too big to regulate. But now I can go back to the policy people and to the government and to the EU Commission and tell them and showcase, actually, we tried. But nothing in the current toolbox is working. And that is, for example, we have been very inspired by Australia and the final offer arbitration model. And based on the Australian model, and we have also, reviewed the Canadian one and the UK one, we have drafted a European proposal. So actually, at the same time, when we showcase the current legislation doesn't work in practice, and we can't implement the great, political intention around the free press and informed citizens, we also offer concrete solutions. And I think that is one of the learnings, because it's such a complex discussion. But it's also important, I think, and that is another learning, that we show that we have done on our side, on the publisher side, all we can do ourselves before we come again to the policymakers and ask for help.
I think it's so, by the way, that's an amazing list you've just run through. But part of the thing that strikes me is you could only do that in a coordinated and such a specific way as a CMO. So as a collective management organization, the fact that you can do it from one central position and understand that you're choreographing every single one of these things towards a kind of policy discussion. I think we'd probably say, Rikke, if you looked at the current efforts of sort of UK, US publishers, we might be able to tick all the boxes that you've ticked, but it would be individual publishers in each of those places. And they aren't coordinating evidence, they're not coordinating legal approaches, they're not coordinating the kind of overlaps between the various bits of legislation. They're not thinking about how that can all be presented as a managed program. That's incredibly powerful, I think, to do that from sort of one central point of view.
I think so too, Karen. I think it would be enormously helpful here for you to explain exactly how that collective works, what it does, because I've argued for a long time that I've said this on stage for years that, as publishers, it doesn't matter if you're the New York Times or you're the Guardian. If you're arguing with big tech, you're an ant arguing with an elephant. Okay, even the New York Times is an ant against an elephant, but collectively we're a bigger elephant. And so you have to eventually figure out that your strength is in numbers, okay, not in indignation. And so tell me, how have you managed to pull that off? And what special superpowers has it given you, to Chris's point?
Well, I fully agree with both of you. The strength is a collective approach. And, that was the mindset from the beginning. We are a startup, right? And we knew from the beginning that we represent a small country, even though we are united. But we needed to use this unity, as you mentioned, as our strength. And I think, again, the mindset that we are willing to act and we are willing to learn while we act, and we take risks. And we learn as we act. And I think that's really a startup mindset. We know we need to be agile. We understand that we will fail, but we will learn as we go along. And I think that is one of the learnings, that we don't have all the answers when we start, all the cases. We knew we wanted to test mediation arbitration. We knew that we wanted partnerships agreement. We knew we wanted to reach out to all global tech companies because we wanted the dialogue, even though in the beginning I knew that probably they wouldn't enter into a license agreement. But I needed, to have a lot of exchange with the global tech companies to understand the legal position, the strategy, and the tactics. Because then I have a more sense of feeling what they're telling, in Brussels when they do their lobbying side. And it has been super useful. And at the same time, I have a board and the members, they have, they understand that we need to act now. Even though I can't answer all their questions, even though, the lawyers from the public service broadcasters, they have a lot of good questions, but we need to act. And at the same time, of course, we're trying to see if we can find other partners that actually acknowledge, the legal framework, that actually acknowledge copyright, that it's important with a diverse media industry. And here also it's a kind of new land. We are cooperating, for example, with the National LLM, a research institution, and the Danish Chamber of Commerce, where we're going to license our archive. We are entering into agreements with Prorata. So we're trying to partner again with companies where we share a joint mission to showcase that there are alternatives also to some of the global tech companies.
All right. Two things. So the first thing is that you can't move forward if you don't take the first step. And you don't always know exactly where you're going, but you have to go, right? And we've got the same situation happening here with the under 16s. It's called the under 16s delay here. So basically it stops children under 16 using social media. It starts on the 10th. So, just a couple of days. No one really knows what's going to happen, but, they're very clear that we don't know what's going to happen, but we know that what is happening is not right. So therefore we're going to start to change it and then adapt as we go. So it's funny, I was chatting to somebody from the DOJ that prosecuted Google in court. And he said, we're fighting an industry that famously moves fast and breaks things, and we go too slow fixing things. And we have to change this mechanism, or otherwise we always get outrun. So I think that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is, I'm interested to know how you managed to get the diverse viewpoints of those different media companies to eventually align, though, because you have allowed, under law, your publishers to collectively bargain. Australia started its process with the News Media Bargaining Code by removing the cartel rules that allowed the publishers to collectively negotiate. South Africa did the same thing. Canada did the same thing. So when you reach an imbalance that's so clear, you have to remove the piece that's created the imbalance, right, to allow it to be coordinated. Clearly, that's an essential first step. But even then, publishers don't always align. So how did was it your charm? Was it something special and unique? What managed to persuade them to all walk the same way with you, or 99% to walk with you?
I think it was a sense of urgency. That, again, this challenge is so huge. We don't have a chance if we don't stand united. And I think we all share that. Then, of course, I think that's the most important. And that comes from inside all of my members. That has nothing to do with me. But I think, it was important to create an organization and to have some statutes where people could see themselves reflected. The startups, the small ones, the local ones, the regional ones. This was not about, creating a new media industry organization where the biggest would decide. So it was about, creating trust among the members, because suddenly they had to cooperate in a new way. Normally they're competitors and hard competitors. So we have, we have worked with, creating relations, creating trust, creating deep transparency. Also with the journalist organization. And again, focus on where do we need to stand united to be a success, both collectively and also individually. So we need from the CMO to always, to be very mindful that everything we do must create added value to our members, no matter their size. And as long as we do that, they will stay on board. So actually, I think, and that is also why we are entering into these agreements with Cloudflare, framework agreements with Cloudflare and ProRata. It's because, suddenly many of the members can see they don't have the time or resources or focus to do this on themselves. And maybe, Cloudflare or ProRata wouldn't prioritize a local one in Denmark. But since we do this collectively, now it becomes interesting from the global partners. And it's a huge help from the local partners that they can actually just opt in because we have done the legal work around it and we stand united. So it gives them comfort that they can act. And, since we can't lean into OpenAI's technology because they don't want to dance with us, we try to test, ProRata's technology, for example.
It's an incredible test, actually, when you think that so the challenge with most of these setups is a publisher will do a deal with a company, but they always then have the substitution to the next publisher. So it's very hard to test the impact of changing, because you can always find another publisher to step in on that platform. And you're providing, I guess, a kind of almost like a pure scientific test of what if we move a whole country from state A to state B, what's the impact without internal substitution between publishers? That's super interesting. I can't help thinking, I've got to ask you a question. You have, out of your right ear, it's very obvious that you have Greenland. And it moves over to the United States. And I'm wondering how much, we are talking ultimately about a lot of American companies. And you have a particular relationship right now with the current US administration. How much does that, how much does that draw a sense of urgency? How much does that culturally sort of give you courage in this conversation?
Interesting question. Actually, it's not my focus at all. Because, what I am focused on is we need a level playing field. And we don't want, monopolists abusing the dominance. So I actually don't care where the companies come from, whether it's China or India or the US, where I'm extremely focused, actually. So I'm not spending time on that agenda. Of course, I'm aware of the discussion when it comes to geopolitics. It's all over the place. But we are very focused in the CMO.
Karen, here's a question. So the things that these tech companies are more afraid of than anything else is a precedent. Yeah? Half the world's afraid of their president, but what they're afraid of is a precedent, right? And as soon as someone manages to make them toe a line and pay a set of money, the whole world, except America, is going to leap in instantly, right? So there are some that would take the view that it's an inevitability that will eventually happen, and they're just playing for time, extracting as much money as they can until the inevitable axe drops. In your country, I guarantee that someone over in Mountain View or in the valley somewhere has a calculator that says, this is how much money we make in Denmark. And this is how much jeopardy we face if Denmark wins. What are you going to do if they all just say, we're just going to turn off Denmark and leave?
That is definitely, a risk. And that is also why we're trying to balance, all our parallel work streams that we have. Interim license agreement. Google is very aware that we are against the launch of AI Overview and AI Mode in Denmark because we assert our rights, and they didn't care. And that is also why we, in parallel with all the other discussions we have, are looking into, as you also are in Australia, how do we respond if they block news or if they just turn off news, as they did in Australia and Canada and California and actually also the Czech Republic. So we have started a work in parallel where we analyze, must carry, must offer, the incentives as you have, what other tools do we actually have? So we're doing this work in parallel, and here we also have an opening in Europe because the relevant directive, the Audiovisual Media Directive, is up for revision. And here also the video platforms, but also the social media platforms are regulated. And of course here we have highlighted that we need to look into this. So no matter what kind of platforms you are, you should have certain obligations. It's not just the cable operators anymore because fewer and fewer people are watching cable TV. They are on YouTube or Facebook or whatever.
So I've got to ask, when you've calculated the risk, I assume this is like the publisher picture in reverse, right? So if every platform pulls out, that's one risk. But if individual platforms pull out, the others just take the space. With probably Google is the biggest calculation. So it's too big a question to answer, but a very sort of high level summary. Have you calculated the risk that if Google were to say tomorrow, we've had enough, Denmark is not for us, what happens?
That's a very good question. Our analysis has been so far that since we have the EU presidency, it would be super difficult for Google to do that. And that was why we have worked very hard on the presidency and the wording in the program. And that is why we continue to, have this as a top priority also in the coming year where Cyprus and Ireland will take over, somehow to compensate for our weakness, right, on a policy level. So we have the commercial level and the risk here, and then we have a policy awareness, and you can say a kind of educational level. So we try to risk, we try to work with risk and avoid, this situation by working with a lot of policymakers, civil servants in the European Union. So in practice, it would be kind of super difficult, actually, for Google to do that. But you never know.
Well, precedent is going to cost them, I keep the numbers on my wall, a precedent is going to cost them $200 billion a year in their highest margin, 78% margin business. They are going to fight that tooth and nail. And if they have to walk out of countries, they will. Mm. So I have a little bit of first-hand experience on this. When Australia decided to take its position on the News Media Bargaining Code, Rod Sims, who we've had on this podcast, was abundantly clear. And he just basically said, well, that's not really my problem. I'm here to work on competition, and this is anti-competitive, and I'm going to deal with it. And the CEO of Google here said, well, we're going to pull our search engine from Australia. And I thought that was a fascinating thing to say, because they earn $10 billion in Australia, and they employ only about 280 people. So they're not really that big a deal in the GDP sense from the people that they employ. And so that felt like a deal where you just say, well, go on then. And so to test that, I did a very, very scientific study, which involved sending my staff to a coffee shop, to a series of coffee shops, and asking people, what they thought about Google leaving. And the conversation in the coffee shops wasn't, oh no, that's a disaster, the sky's falling. It was, well, what are the other search engines? Because Microsoft's got one, hasn't it? And isn't there one that plants trees called Ecosia or something like that? Mm-hmm. And then you suddenly found that I just don't think they've got the weight that they think they have. So in the event that they left, there are plenty of European search engines that could replace the space. There are plenty of social media companies in Europe that could fill the space. I would imagine your government would feel strongly incented to fund a whole series of domestic startups to go and compete in that space. That sounds awfully like, let me think, what's that word? I don't know what it is in Danish, but it sounds like competition.
Yeah.
Which is where we're all trying to go, right?
Yeah.
I read the Google court case submissions, Ricky, and I think you'll find that Google is under significant competitive threat. It's in their SEC filings that they're under enormous competitive threat. They have so many competitors everywhere in the world. So you're absolutely right.
But I think that's a super good point. And, in Denmark, the Danish government has recommended to all civil servants that they should use DuckDuckGo because Google is not secure. And every time when we entered into the agreement with Ecosia or DuckDuckGo, again, we highlight and make a lot of press awareness that there are alternatives. And so I fully agree with you. And when Google started their blocking test in Europe, they did that in November last year, and they finalized in February. We were extremely clear and very vocal that this was an abuse of dominance. Even though they told us it was just about 1% of the Danes that they were blocked, but still, from our perspective. So this entire discussion around blocking news, would tap into the entire discussion around abuse of dominance, and then suddenly a European Commission discussion. And we have a commission, and we also have a work program for the commission from 24 to 29 around, fighting mis and disinformation. We have the entire discussions in Europe about shielding our democracy, where the news media play a crucial role. So if they do this, it will actually, it will support our agenda that they actually are abusing their dominance. And we need to act much stronger than we have done previously.
Let's talk about some numbers, because I have them. So Meta generated $164.5 billion US last year, of which 160.63 billion, 97.2% came from advertising. So Meta's not a social engine at all. It is a advertising monopoly. And Google, 78% of Google's revenue is advertising, which means it's also an advertising monopoly. And the third largest advertising company in the world is Amazon. In Europe, Meta generated 23.2% of its revenue from Europe, $38.4 billion. Now, it can't afford to lose $38.4 billion. It can't. Its share price is doing very, very well at the moment. But if it loses, if it loses a quarter of its revenue, okay, it can't afford that. $38.4 billion is a lot of money and gives them a lot of leverage to do a lot of commercial deals to get out of a lot of strife, right? Don't you think? Do you not eventually just do the math and go, yeah, we could pull out, we could, because we're a super big deal, right? But we can't really afford to, because that's going to really hurt us commercially and financially. But the precedent is more scary. But if Australia is going to do it to us, and Canada is going to do it, and South Africa is going to do it to us, and the UK is suddenly going to find some courage and do it to us as well, eventually they're going to figure out that paying is the better business model, aren't they, Chris? Isn't that just the maths of jeopardy?
Possibly, but the point is time is. So I think whenever you're doing any kind of deal, any negotiation, one of the things you work out earliest is whose side is time on here. So in the absence of a deal, who's happier? And that's, so even if I understand that I have to do a deal, and I mean, as publishers, we've been in many situations where, we are kind of having to recognize costs that we weren't previously. We've probably seen this with, for example, with the retail estate. We probably have to put more money into wholesale and retail, but in that case, time is on our side. And so those negotiations take a long time. And I think you're just seeing exactly the same thing, even if there's probably one person in Meta, it's, you know who it is, who understands that at some point they probably have to pay. The incentive is still to make that as far into the future as possible.
No question.
And that's, all of the words that come in the middle to make sure that it takes a long time. They have a natural advantage, I think, in negotiating in, particularly with European Union countries, in that it is, you'll negotiate, you've got a kind of an EU charter which turns into local law, which gets interpreted 26 different ways. And you can scratch your head and look at, it's very hard to understand all this. And, we couldn't possibly agree something with Denmark that we couldn't then, affect in Germany. And so our teams are working night and day. It's very easy to just delay. And I think that's one of the biggest negotiating tactics we've seen everywhere. Overstate the complexity of the problem, and as by doing that, ensure that it takes a long time to even contemplate solutions. Is that your experience, Gareth?
I fully agree. I fully agree. And I think that is why, we should act. We should test all the legal tools we have, because then we can actually short-term go back to the policymakers and say it doesn't work in practice. So I think that should be the response to their delaying tactics, actually. Because, sometimes we have a tradition, we're trying to analyze things and we need to have all the answers and then we act. But then we have lost 2 years, right? And we don't have 2 years.
Can I ask, in sort of a satellite of all of the different countries that are then kind of enacting this law, normally what we find with the EU laws is there'll be someone who's miles ahead, and it's normally in the Nordics somewhere, who've got on and done it. And then we'll find someone who's a long way behind, and that's usually France. Or Germany, who are still kind of considering it. And who are you at the moment kind of running alongside, and who do you wish could run faster?
I think we are very close together in the Nordics, of course, and very aligned. And we have a sister organization also in Sweden and in the Netherlands. I would say I'm very inspired from many countries. For example, France, because they have extremely active competition authorities. And I would love to see the Danish competition authority as active as the French one, because actually short term they could do something. To my knowledge, the only place in Europe where Google is actually paying a fair amount for press publishers' rights is in France, because of the French competition authorities' involvement. And you could say, from my perspective, as this is a global issue, I would prefer we join forces on a global level. But when we started, I prefer the Nordic level or Northern Europe level or a European level. But just to, as we started discussing in the beginning, just to unite the Danish press publishers wasn't easy. But maybe, there is a new window, because now everybody seems around the world to have understood how serious this is. And maybe, we will achieve more again, both collectively but also individually, if we join forces when it comes to policy, especially, and to enforcement and making global deals. But it's super difficult.
Well, Ricky, you heard John Slade from the FT once talk about NATO for news, which is, again, we're going to make you the Secretary General, I think, Karen.
There you go.
I would love
because you're
that.
not the president of the European Union, apparently. But
Exactly, and I will never be.
Yeah.
So,
So what I'm seeing here is like raindrops on a windscreen coalescing. When I travel, I was in France a couple of months ago talking to AFP and helping them with thinking about some of this stuff. Very, very bloody minded in France. They're pretty cranky. Not AFP, but France in general. But what I'm finding is that, I'm in Canada, I'm getting chatting to somebody in a coffee shop, and I mention somebody from a competition authority on the other side of the world, like, oh yeah, we spoke last week. And then you talk to the FTC and they're like, oh no, we were chatting to the DOJ, and the DOJ was talking to the guy in the UK, and he was chatting to the Australian guy about the South African. There is a coming together of the competition authorities. So if publishers can align to some extent, nation by nation by nation, underneath their competition authorities, and then the competition authorities engage with each other, and the industry groups engage with each other, and the policymakers begin to engage with each other, then we might start to get somewhere, right? And I'm starting to see this happen. What we're seeing is effectively, you can call it the NATO if you want. I'm not going to, he chose that word. It's not my word, so I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. But we're seeing a collective action coming up all over the world in a common interest of trying to create some kind of value to premium content, because ultimately that's going to create what is known as, as premium and trusted AI. There's a funny Australian phrase. I'm actually English, but there's a funny Australian phrase. It's called shirt fronting. And it's when, two people that are in an argument kind of literally get their shirts together like this, puffing their chests out. And we've seen the AI companies shirt front governments all over the world, and those governments have then taken a step back. And if they don't take a step back, they generally get a data center, right? That seems to be pretty much the transaction. Chris, am I being unfair?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Pretty much it.
So where do you think this ends, Karen? Because you have stepped up, your country has stepped up, your competition authorities have stepped up, Europe's stepped up, Canada's stepped up, South Africa's stepped up, Australia's stepped up, UK's coming. I'm confident the UK's coming. Where's this going to end, and how long is it going to take? How long do we need to be able to effectively bankroll our publishers to get them to the other side of this chaos? Or not chaos, this discomfort.
That's a very good question. A very complex one. And I don't think I have the answer. But what we are trying to do again when it comes to the AI is that, we're testing again what we have in the toolbox. We have involved the government from the beginning in the mediation, because mediation is a political instrument, you can say, because it's the Minister for Culture appointing the mediator. And now it's very obvious that OpenAI and Gemini, they don't want, to cooperate in Denmark. They don't want to play by the rules in Denmark. So we can continue with all the other AI companies. And then at the same time, in parallel, we prepare all these concrete solutions, policy solutions. In Denmark, we have had this AI expert group appointed by the Minister for Culture, and they delivered their recommendations in September under the Danish EU presidency, where they actually suggested, for example, a final offer arbitration model, an opt-in model, a reversal of burden of proof. So I think, in parallel, where I try to get them to the negotiation table, we work with policymakers in the EU to push, for some changes. That is not super difficult. For example, the final offer arbitration model is not that difficult actually to implement. And here Denmark could take the lead again. We could test it in Denmark, and then the rest of Europe could follow. So that is our approach. Let's introduce this kind of regulation in Denmark if we can, and then the rest of Europe could follow. And if the government believes it's an EU act, then they should front run it in the EU.
Is that why you're the happiest country on earth? Because you're willing to give these things a go, and when bad things happen, you fix them?
I think the willingness actually to act, it gives, energy and new hope. Because otherwise, it's so complex, and sometimes, you're thinking, I'm giving up. Because, I think, that there's so much we can do, actually, on our side. Every day, as you're doing, as our entire industry, they have been around for decades, and they have been adaptable, and they have been agile, and they have learned new technology, and we will continue to do that. At the same time, in my work, I focus on the level playing field. So my members can focus on being innovative, continue to be innovative, and use AI as a great tool and whatever technology we have. And I think that's also one of the learnings, actually, that in the CMO, we can do the legal work, the enforcement work. They actually also the knowledge sharing, which is key now because everything is running so fast and there's so much information out there. There's so many players out there, so it's difficult to have the overview. And then at the same time, all our members, small as huge, they can focus on their work.
You have just reminded me of one thing, and then I'm going to be quiet and let Chris get his question in. Under the Australian rule, under the News Media Bargaining Code, the first go at this, it forced Google and Meta to do deals with publishers, but those deals were done in secret. And Google and Meta were very insistent that the commercial terms of those were not made public. Now, through scuttlebutt and, people in the pub after closing time, eventually we figured out that it was about $250 million a year, okay? And so we figured it out, but no one really knows what the commercial terms were. And in my conversations with senior executives at news organizations here in Australia, multiple of them, they all say to me, oh, well, we can't talk about that because we have lots of rules that say we can't talk about this, that, and the other. That's not collective bargaining. That's something else. That is creating a new cartel where you have secrecy and FOMO, and that's not collective bargaining at all. In fact, it's the antithesis of collective bargaining. When you did your deals in Denmark, did you make the commercial terms public, or were they all in private?
For the members, everything is public.
So explain that. That's very
it's
important.
not public. Yes, I think, again, the transparency is key. And we also had the discussion when we decided on our distribution model, when we have something to distribute, what should the model be? Huge discussion with a lot of potential conflicts, right? And here again, we were very transparent. We tested all different models, and at the end of the day, came up with a model that was accepted by all members. And I think here again, transparency is key. Under the board, we have a licensing committee where all members can join, not just the CEO or C-level. All members can join, and here they have access to everything.
You may be one of the only places then where the kind of independent publishers and the startup publishers have access to the same information, including the deals for the big publishers. That is pretty unique, Ricky. I can't think of anywhere else where that would be the case.
It's a recommendation I made to Australia's ACCC under my submission into the news media incentive, because I think unless you provide at least a bargaining benchmark for smaller publishers, they don't know what to ask for. And, they're just going to get outgunned when they walk up to the if indeed they even get an answer to their question, right? But they're not going to know what to ask for. So if they know that the term is, it's kind of like $30,000 a year per journalist in your employee, then you've got a model at least to have an intelligent conversation. I think that actual transparency, it doesn't have to be the actual commercial deal, but it has to be a benchmark, I think is essential if we're going to make this work.
And again, the journalist also knows everything. And I think that's also important because, we need to focus now on the work with big tech and not each other, because we are few people and it's a complex matter. So it's always to stay, focused on what moves the needle instead of internal disputes or discussion around distribution or split or whatever.
So you do the negotiation as the CMO and you do the distribution. Yeah. Is that the way it works?
Yes.
Interesting. I love this. I literally feel like there's a huge road that used to run out in front of us that looked like an absolute bomb site, full of holes, chaos. You were never ever going to get your car down it, and we're just ever so carefully filling in the potholes and creating a road we can all use. I've come away feeling really, really optimistic. How are you feeling, Chris?
Yeah, same. I feel like I should just state, because just the whole point of this, you've mentioned it a couple of times, Karen. I'm a big fan of the phrase level playing field. Is that in everything that we're talking about, this is about getting to a fair commercial kind of position where publishers can compete with each other and use platforms to kind of distribute and to get to their audiences. But we're not asking for government handouts. We're not asking for kind of anything that is anything else but a reflection of the value that we provide in a kind of interconnected ecosystem. And so you're right, Ricky, the road, you can see the road, but the end game of that is the position where we all feel like, look, this is a fair shake, as you'd say in Australia. It's a fair shake, mate. And we can kind of get on with being publishers. And it's been really inspiring. I just think the level of collaboration is the thing that I would really take away from it. And I've always been impressed whenever we did these a few years back, we used to do study tours to the Scandinavian publishers. And, when on the plane back, the thing that we would always be talking about was this sort of sense that there was a much lower kind of element of church and state between the commercial side of publishers and journalists. There was a much lower sense of hierarchy in general between sort of big and small, and the collaboration was so intuitive that they forgot to mention it when they talked about it, but we all noticed it. And I've really come away from today, I think, with that sense that that's part of your superpower, is the ability to kind of get together publishers under a common thread.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We're all going to move to Denmark. I've decided. Right, I've got to go because I need to go.
But I think you have better weather, so maybe I should come to Australia.
Not much better, to be honest. Not me. Not much better.
We'd love to have you, Karen. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We really do appreciate it, and well done on your work. I mean, just well done. Amazing. Thank you very much indeed.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in. The Future Media Podcast is a production of Future Media and Ricky Sutton.